Hey, CMTA parents, it's Sarah Kesty. Thank you so much for joining us. It's me. I'm really glad to have you. So if you don't know me through CMTA, I am on the advisory board for CMTA, helping parents navigate the school system, which is exactly what we're doing today. So I'm really glad that you're here. I hope to cover kind of a general information session and then go into your questions. So thank you again for taking the time. I am a teacher in California, just for background. I do have CMT. I just had another foot upgrade on May 10th and looking forward to one again on June 4th. So certainly know what it's like. And I had a couple of pretty yucky experiences growing up with the school system and my CMT clashing. So I take that as motivation for me to be better for my students and be a better advocate. So I'm very happy to use the situations in my past to help make things better for students right now. So with that, so I appreciate a whole bunch of you put in feedback about what you were looking for and kind of some of the questions. So I hope to touch on most of those. If I don't, like I said, we'll have time at the end too. So here we go. The Facebook Live is so distracting. There's so many smiley faces coming up. I'm so glad you guys are interacting. It's just really like, wow, I've never. Awesome. So I was trying to prioritize what advice I could have, because there's all kinds of little things, like from if your child has a hard time writing, there's some accommodations we can put in, or there's just a whole plethora of ideas. But I think my main thing that I could say, that if you only had like 2% battery life left in you, the biggest thing I would say to put forward for your child's school plan is to find a person at school. So what I mean by that is like a go-to, somebody like the resource teacher or the school psychologist or a school counselor, somebody that you know has your back and that you connect with. Because the school system isn't always easy, and I'm not placing blame like it's a whole bunch of bad people. It's a bureaucracy, and you kind of have to like finesse your way through, and some social finesse will go a long way. So when you can find that person, and it might not be the first person you talk to, and unfortunately, you're going to have to do this as your child transitions to middle school and high school as well, if they're not there already. But, finding that person that you connect with gives you a go-to if something goes wrong, even if it doesn't go wrong with that person, because chances are if you dive with them, they're going to be pretty good advocates for your child too. But that can be the person to connect you with resources if you needed to talk to the PE teacher, or that person could even speak on your behalf. I do that a lot for my students. So I have several parents who email me even though their child's not on my caseload, but because we connected, I'm able to speak out for them, and I'm happy to do so. So in thinking priority-wise, I would think finding that person would be the number one space, because paperwork can look beautiful. You can get an IEP or a 504. Don't panic if you don't know what that is, because I'll explain it in a second. But, you can have all these things that look glorious, but if they're not put into place, then it's really not, there's no point. And you have to have a person who at school will kind of monitor that for you and keep you up to date. So that's my number one recommendation. I know that seems kind of crazy. It's just people-based, but that's really where we are. So 504 and IEP, we get a lot of questions about this. If your child has a disability, CMT would qualify for an IEP in most cases. And by the way, this isn't legal advice, but this is based on my experience, because it is an other health impairment, or it could even be considered a orthopedic impairment. And those are two of the 13 categories for the federally recognized disabilities that are served on an IEP. So there's 13 of them based on federal law, and we can find a spot for CMT under those two categories, so either OHI or just OH. which what you'll get kind of caught in the alphabet soup. But basically, those are two spots where you could have an IEP written for your child. But again, the IEP is only as strong as the team that implements it, which is why I'm saying get that person, because if extra time is an accommodation you put in the IEP, but the teachers are just not being as flexible in giving that extra time, then it's just something written down on paper. So we want to make sure that we have a strong connection first, and then the strong, good paperwork that goes with it. So an IEP is a little bit more monitored than a 504 in terms of you have annual goals. That can also include services under the umbrella of special education. And I'll caution you in this sense, don't go around saying my child's in special ed in front of your child. That's just services. It's just, like sometimes you need to go to the doctor or the dentist, and sometimes you get adaptive PE at school, or, because the term special education, although I live it and love it, I don't ever explain that to my students. There's no point in my telling them that they're in special ed. We're in different classes because we learn differently, and that's fine, because there's so much connotation with how we speak about things. So I'll get into that a little bit more later in terms of reflecting on how it impacted my development. But in terms of your child, yes, an IEP is special education, and it can include special education services like adaptive PE and occupational therapy, or speech therapy, although that's not typically related to CMT. But you can, yes, those are special ed services, but just please, there's no need to call it special ed in front of your child. I think that's really helpful for them to not have to experience that label and its connotation. So the IEP, yes, does include services. It's under the umbrella of special education. We have those two areas where we could qualify with CMT. There's also the option of a 504. And a 504 plan is named after the civil rights law. So there's different legal spaces where IEP and 504 fit in. 504 is under civil rights, and it's similar to the ADA, like Americans with Disabilities Act, where it helps provide changes to the environment, the general education environment, so that students can access in the same way that their non-disabled peers do. So examples of that would be, like I was mentioning, extra time. That could be a very simple accommodation that students can have to make up for the fact that maybe they might need to take a break because their hands are fatiguing, or things like that. So it's just like small changes within the school environment. Sometimes it can be services. Most of the time it's just things that the student can advocate for on his own behalf, or things that the teachers can do for the student to make sure that things are even and fair, and we all have access. So an example of a 504 level support would just be a ramp instead of stairs, things like that just make access for everybody. So I know you may have further questions about that, and I don't want to get too techy in this, so technical. So if you do, you can reach out to CMTA and they'll connect you with me, and we can talk more one-on-one on what's going on with your kid, because I want to spend some time with kind of the other stuff I have to share with you. So as a parent, I know that you probably have had all kinds of experiences with the school system and with doctors, and with accepting the implications for CMT. And the good news is you have great resources in CMTA. The tough news is this will feel like a battle sometimes. Again, and I'm not talking bad about my profession, but we're busy and we forget, or we don't quite understand, or we make jokes that maybe, I can't tell you how many times I've been called lazy, where it's like, oh, you have no idea how to assess my internal effort. So labels like that are really hurtful. So I would say just be ready to take care of yourself and advocate and inform and repeat. So it's going to be kind of like your end of summer thing that you do is connect with the school, connect with that one person that you have, and say, hey, remember, my student needs extra time walking between classes, or, I'd love to share this resource with you because I want you to understand my child. Things like that. And it doesn't have to be a fight where it's a direct confrontation, but it may be a battle in sense of having to repeat it and be patient, because the teachers aren't going to necessarily be perfect the first time, like none of us are. So just being patient and being aware and listening to the way your child describes his or her school day is really important to hear, like, oh, wait a minute, you what? You had to, wait, hang on. And not necessarily get your child involved in that advocacy component until they're old enough to do it on their own. But get yourself listening and seeing like how things are going and how well the plan's being followed, because like I told you, you're going to want to have that person, if the plan's not being followed well, to be able to advocate on your behalf at the school. So be prepared to kind of advocate, inform, and repeat, I would say, throughout the year. Right now, there's a lot of PE testing going on. So checking in with your child about what that looks like, or checking in with the school about what that looks like, would be really helpful. So I would say there's 2 times a year where you really have to be the most active. Now is one of them. Starting like mid-late April, where we start doing state testing and finals and things like that. Teachers are under a lot of pressure. Students are under a lot of pressure. And that could be a time where some of the accommodations sort of get not as well in place because of the stress factors going on with everybody. So listening and making sure that you're advocating at that time, and then also at the beginning of the year, so that a good plan is set up before your child even has to go through some of the struggles that would make us have to develop a better plan. Why not start with a great plan and just adjust as we go? Something to remind teachers and maybe some of your child's friends as you're talking about, oh, you guys are like writing me cute comments. I love it. Thank you. Hi, guys. As you are talking to people about CMT, and I'm going to interrupt myself because I want to make this kind of the invisible visible. I have not always been open. That's like the light way of saying it. I have not always been very honest about CMT. I wasn't honest with myself. I was very, very ashamed of it for until just about 30. So it took a long time for me to be okay with it. And part of it was my reaching out to the CMTA. So I want you to know that if your child's not ready to admit it, don't force them. It's, it's okay for them to be kind of hushed about it. You certainly don't have to be angry with them or think that they're lying or that they can't handle it. Like, let's let them come into it on their own, because they will. And so if, as you're going through all this advocacy, if your child is like I was and is very uncomfortable with it and doesn't feel good about the label or the implications or any of that, just either let them step out and you can handle kind of the politics of it, or one way to frame it that I really like is to just call it a something. And technically I wrote a children's book called Everyone Has Something, with the idea that it could help just approach disabilities as like, you know what, we all have a challenge. We all have something that makes us different and something that makes us frustrated about ourselves that we didn't choose. A lot of my students have learning disabilities or ADHD where like they're bright and they just can't make it happen at school, and how frustrating. So instead of saying like, oh, you have this learning disability, like think about that. Disability and learning, like, does that mean I can't learn? You know, there's a lot of implication and connotation with words we use. So instead, we just call it something. Everyone has a something. That's my something. And if you can set up that sort of space within the classroom and within your child's peer group, it really helps take away a lot of that negative connotation, which is in good part what bullies use to make people upset, is the connotation. Because if you think about it, if you're called a nasty word, that's just a sound. Those are just phonemes coming in your ear. It's all the socialized meaning that comes along with that word that hurts. And so if you can take away that pain of, you know, like, oh, you're disabled, or you're crippled, those words, like they feel bad. If you can take away that pain a little bit of like, oh, this is just my something, then bullies have a lot less fight for them. It just kind of takes away their teeth. They can't get into it because there's not as much of a reaction when peers are, and if you can inform the peers, then they will say, oh, wait a minute, that's just her something, no big deal. And I've actually seen where I had a 5th grader stand up against an 8th grader to say, like, you know what, that's just my something. You can't tease me about it. You have something too. And it was so powerful to watch the 8th grader go, and was out of words because it didn't have the damaging impact that the 8th grader had hoped it would. And the student was already prepared with what to say. So in a little bit, we're going to talk about bullying, but I sort of got myself off track. But my main point is that if your child's not ready and isn't accepting of the diagnosis, and you need to get nitty gritty, talk about it without them present. Because part of the of my experience that I wish I could kind of time machine back is that a lot of people talked about me in front of me, and it ended up that I was hearing words that were descriptors of my disability that I took on as descriptors of me. So like progressive disability, or you know, things that peripheral neuropathy, like as a 6-year-old, that is scary. You think something is wrong with you. So if you need to get nitty gritty and advocate for your child based on like some deficits that he has, like maybe he can't walk the mile, but you don't want to put that in his narrative of like, oh, my child can't walk, then just excuse him, send him on a fake errand, whatever you need to do to get them away from it, like, is very powerful in that you can get them to have a good plan, but not have been privy to some of the when we express the deficits, they can turn into a self-identity, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, so a CMT, when you're talking about CMT, whether you're talking it to your child or about it with other professionals, what I really want you to emphasize is that they can do a ton of research, and please, like, send them chocolates if they do, that's great. But if whatever they see on paper could look very different compared to what it looks like in your child. It's a sneaky disease in that it plateaus for a while. It can progress really, really fast in some people, really, really slow in some people. I know people who were diagnosed in their 40s and 50s and had just totally normal, who's normal? You know, totally typical developments physically as they were growing up, and then all of a sudden, bam, they have manifestations of it. So just please, as you're explaining it, remember to emphasize that it changes over time and that it manifests differently in everybody else, and that it's invisible. And so sometimes, like, I had a school counselor, as an example, grab my hand and say, there's nothing wrong with you, look at your hand. And I'm like, well, I don't have as thick of muscle. And he's like, oh, you just have girl hands. And this wasn't that long ago, you know? And so I almost felt crazy because I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like I do have these issues. I have pain. You can't see pain. So emphasizing the invisibility of it, I think is helpful if you have a child who maybe doesn't have the outward physical manifestations of it, like braces or things that you can see, because it's not any less valid because we can't see it from the outside. So I would recommend just reminding people of that. And then with that, connecting it back to if teachers are claiming that your child's not trying, that's what, remember I said, like, listen to the narrative of what's happening at school. That would be an indicator that you probably need to check in with your person at school, maybe the teacher who's saying that, to really kind of get down to the background of what's going on, because I've never met a kid who intentionally fails. You know what I mean? Like, even my toughest cases, the only reason a kid who would show up and purposefully fail at school, like, first of all, if you're going to fail and you're mindfully doing it, you probably don't show up at school. So, but if they're acting like they don't care, probably they're covering up some deficits and some vulnerabilities. So I challenge any educator to really show me a kid who does not care and does not try, because I would say that they're probably a kid who's had some difficulties at school, maybe he's carrying some baggage, and talked about that self-narrative about what have I heard about myself. If I've heard about myself a whole bunch of times that I can't XYZ, and then my teacher says, why don't you XYZ? I'm going to be confused, and I'm going to probably dish out some behaviors to kind of cover up that I'm not comfortable with that, or I'm going to try my best and it's still not going to look good enough. Maybe because of my narrative, maybe because of my disability, maybe the combination. But I would really challenge, if you hear a teacher referencing your child as lazy or not trying to step up, and I can help you kind of massage the language so that it's not too aggressive, but it gets the point across that, like, hey, step back just a second. Like, this isn't okay. We want to understand where our kid's coming from. Also with that, like, if your child's getting knocked down for handwriting, a great accommodation, if the handwriting is impacted by the CMT, a great accommodation would be to be able to type. There's so much technology. We could do that. Or there's even systems where you can, like, put in a little headset and speak what you want to say, and it'll type it on the computer. And then you can go back and kind of update what you want. So tons of ideas in that sense. But if handwriting is being knocked down, that's another space where the teacher might not understand the invisibility of CMT, might not understand how maybe some days when you have CMT, you just have a hard CMT day. There are some days where I'm like, I have the cutest outfit picked out, ready, and like kind of challenging shoes involved with it, maybe flats with no strap or anything. And I wake up and my feet are like, we have a different plan. It's just a bad CMT day. So it's something to consider if the teacher's saying, like, oh, there's a change or something. It could be CMT related as well. So along the lines of, I wrote stealthy supports as my visual prompt, and I'm trying to think of, like, the easiest way to explain this. Along the lines of, you know, the social and emotional impact of CMT are the supports at school. Because as adults, we can design some great plans for our children, and then plans won't take effect or won't be effective because the child's embarrassed by what we set up. So as we develop plans and supports, we need to think about what naturally kind of flows in the school day and won't stick out, won't make your child feel uncomfortable. Because the worst thing would be to, you could ask for, like, an adaptive technology assessment, and you could have a whole team come out, figure out things to implement, get the coolest, like, technology, and then your child not use it because he's embarrassed. Like, I've seen that so many times where we think of the best ideas and we don't even consult the kid, or we don't think about how within the social development that would impact our child, and then whoops, they're not using it. So as you're designing supports, as you're talking to the team, as you're working with your person at school, I would say think about ways that you can have the supports be stealthy or built into the day, so that it's not oh, this is Charlie's special blah blah. I mean, do you hear the connotation in that? Instead, just like, oh, Charlie uses this, no big deal. So having it kind of connect where it's like it flows within the day and it kind of hides its difference can really make a difference between having a great plan and having your kid use the great plan. So an example of that would be, I have a couple of students with physical disabilities that also impact their learning. And so a couple of them have a really difficult time cutting, and it's just something that is them. And so I will take the examples that I'm going to show the class and pre-cut a couple. And then when we pass out papers, I just switch the one that I pre-cut with the one that the student had passed out to him, and then that's the one that they have. So they get my example one that I've done the cutting, but I didn't have to say, can somebody cut for this student, and make it a big embarrassing moment. So that's something that when you have your person, when your teachers know about CMT, when they understand, those are things that just kind of naturally flow because they understand, like, oh, well, this might be a challenge, so I will think about this mindfully when I'm requesting that they have components that might be hard, activities that might be hard for the child, that I'll just give them my example, or I'll sit them by a peer buddy who just naturally, like, quietly without prompting, just cuts it out for them. Those are things that I would really recommend keeping in mind. And I know they're not always possible, and I know sometimes I know some parents advocate that, like, oh, that embarrassment is part of toughening up, but, like, life's hard enough. We're all going to toughen up. I'd rather see our children feel as included and as typically developing as possible, because I would hate that our plan to help would then get into their narrative of, oh, I can't do this, oh, I can't do that, oh, and and then they'll stop trying. I was told so much growing up that I couldn't wear any shoes other than basically like athletic shoes, that I didn't even try to wear flip-flops, the thong shoes, until I was almost 30. And then I found out, like, oh, my feet do hang on to these. And I don't know how long they will, CMT is progressive, but that was kind of, it's a silly example, but that was an example of how my limiting narrative of what I had heard about myself made me think it was fact and limited even what I put to myself as an option. So I know that some of you had in the questions that you submitted, how do we do career planning, or how do I deal with the physical limitations when my child is really naturally athletic? Those are times also where we have to pay attention to our narrative, because we could be giving them thoughts about themselves that would be limiting in the future, that we're intending as supports. It's a tricky slope. None of us are going to be good at it all the time. But it's something to consider as you're developing the plans, is, are my supports that are intending to help hurting a little bit? And I mentioned that peers can be built-in support. So I know I want to honor your time. Just really quickly about bullying. I was probably the best bully target when I was younger, because I had a little bit of a funky dress style. I had CMT, and I was super sensitive. So I would put on a pretty good bawling show if you picked on me. And I'm not in blame the victim at all. It's not okay to bully, but I recognize that there's a dynamic there, and I was definitely playing a good part of the bully victim, where it encouraged people because it was fun. And it was, whoa, I have crutches and they just started falling down, so I'm going to put that back. Sorry about that. So how does this apply to your children? This applies because if you can mindfully get your child to be prepared if someone teases him or her, it will help a ton in helping that not turn into bullying. Because remember, there's a difference between a mean moment where a child's just a jerk and says something rude. That's just a mean moment. If it's repeated over time and there's a perceived or real difference in power between the two, like the bully's older or bigger or more popular, things like that, where it's that imbalance of power. So over time, imbalance of power, those two things would indicate bullying. Either way, though, kids do tend to pick on each other when there's like a visible difference. So even when there's not a visible difference, they pick on each other sometimes. So preparing your child to react where it's the least fun for the person saying the mean thing is a really powerful thing. So what I mean by that is practicing, rehearsing at home where your child feels comfortable saying like, yeah, I walk like this, but look at you. Or, you know, and it can be a little bit sassy back, because what we want is your child to have something that flows real fast that they don't have to think about, so that they can get away and then have the emotional reaction. Because I'm not saying don't cry. I'm saying don't cry in front of the bully, because it feeds them. So having your child have something to say back initially, even if it's the same canned response forever and ever, or variations of it, will help a ton. And I'm not saying that this means like, oh, we can just like arm our students or our children with preparatory statements and then whoops, we don't deal with bullying. Like if you are hearing it, then it's our job as adults to advocate and talk to the person who's saying the mean things and things like that. But in that moment, we can really help. It's kind of like a fork in the road. If our child reacts where there's not a lot of like juicy, fun crying, then probably the person doing that isn't going to say that stuff again. But if our child reacts where it's a big, big deal like I used to do, oh, it'll happen all the time because, wow, look what Sarah will do. So food for thought as you prepare for bullying. I'm not going to say that it won't happen. I mean, I still, generally as adults, my adults don't as much bully, or not as directly. But I mean, we still see it in the workplace. So it will be an ever-present part of being a little bit of a different kind of human. But it's also something that we can address by having kind of those sassy, like flat affect retorts, like either flat where there's no crying or no reaction, or very sassy where it's just like, oh, I'm not picking on her. She won't freak out and she's not, you know. Okay. And we talked about that. Oh my goodness, we're just flying through. And sorry, I keep looking at my notes, but I wanted to make sure that I was thorough and made sure that I covered everything. So I did get a lot of questions about PE, so I'll address that really quickly. Because we talked about your child would qualify for at least a 504 plan, if not an IEP as well. You can address PE within both of those documents. You can ask that you make specific accommodations, like the option to walk instead of run, the option to not walk, to take breaks when he or she needs to kind of self-monitor, those kind of things. Can go into the accommodations. And again, you're going to listen to your child as they describe the school day and say, oh, wait a minute. Okay, this isn't happening. I got to address this to make sure that the PE is going okay. I would caution you, when I had to do adaptive PE in school, I was actually pulled out from academic time to do adaptive PE. And then, so that already made me different, because the PE teacher would come pick me up and time for adaptive PE, and all the kids are kind of snickery. So I would caution you in that when you set up the supports, make sure that they're not big disruptors in the academic day, and that they're, again, done very stealthy. So it could be like a little pass on their desk that says, oh, at 10:30 I go to adaptive PE, just show the teacher and then walk out. When I do resource supports for students, that's usually how we do it. We make it, you never announce like, oh, time for your special reading group. It's just like, oh, you go to room 6 now, see ya. So as you're setting up accommodations, even if it's just for PE, think about that. Also, I really want to emphasize that as adults, we have I was telling my students the other day, we have this blessing as you get older, like it chips away just this much of how much you care about what other people think each year as you get older, which has been pretty cool. But our kids are loaded with a whole bunch of care about what other people think. And as humans, there's tons of research on why, we had to be social creatures to survive. So it makes sense developmentally. There's also a ton of research on the teen brain about how the social interactions are kind of part of how they find out who they are and where they fit in. So, we as adults have to remember that and honor that, because we need to keep in mind that the social part, like, it's easy for us to say like, oh, what do you care what Johnny says? Like, he's nothing, and we legitimately believe that. But for teens and students of all ages, after about first, second grade, you're really feeling the security of a group of friends. You're trying to fit in. You're like jockeying for your social place. And if there are things that we as adults, again, are putting into place as supports that are impacting that, we have to be mindful about adjusting based on our child's feedback, and also just listening to our child. And if he or she is saying like, Mom, I hate being different, like, I know a lot of the times we want to kick into like, oh, but honey, you're so great at this, and oh, but honey, but like, it's okay to say like, yeah, I get it. It's all right. This sucks. Like, we hate this. And it's okay to feel bad about it for a little bit and validate. Like, yeah, it would be nice to fit in more easily. Let's see how we can get you those cool new shoes to work with your braces. You know what I mean? So I'm not saying like jump in the depression hole with your child, but I'm saying like, it's okay. It really is okay to say like, yeah, this sucks. There's no way around it. This really stinks, and I'm so sorry that you're going through this, honey. And all of those things. You don't have to say like, oh, stop crying, or don't worry about it, or because I think when we are intending to support our children, we end up sort of invalidating what they're saying. Like, oh, but honey, it doesn't matter what people think. Well, like, yeah, legit, it does when you're little. So keep that in mind as you're listening to your child. Sometimes just listening or validating, like, what I hear you saying is, and then sometimes they'll come up with solutions where you're just like, wow, if I had taken over and like mommed this to death, I never would have gotten into this space. So, and I know it's hard because we don't want our loved ones to suffer at all, but just some food for thought as we move on. I'm checking the questions. What questions do you have for me right now? I see build them a bullying self-defense too, Dan says. That's cool. What questions do you have for me specifically on anything? Getting ready to close out this school year, to open up next school year? It's hard to tell if you're typing or what's going on. Oh, goodness gracious. Well, you guys think of that. I did want to let you know that we're going to be posting in the comments right now 2 of the resources that CMTA has for schools that I wrote that will help kind of, there's one resource where it's for you. It's just an easy read document for the busy teacher. So you just print it out, hand it over to the teacher. I would definitely, again, don't just email it. Like, take the time to go in, make the face-to-face, bring them some I don't know, Kleenex or something that they might need for the year, and connect with them face to face again to give them that paper. So we do have that for CMTA, and then we also have a more detailed list of ideas to set up that plan. Like once you have 504 or IEP going, then what components might you want to put in it, or what ideas do you want to cover? I do see that any advice on the playground, Angela, are you asking in terms of access to equipment or kids making fun of your child? Will you let me know, and then we'll talk about that. And then Allison, you said what supports look like in college. Yeah, so supports do go through to college. Generally, I recommend that you bring your IEP probably November, December of the senior year. If you know where you're going, bring your IEP to the school and see how they can translate that into college level support. So they do have, usually it's called like disability support services or something along those lines, but they do have a whole department at the school that will help write accommodation letters, and then those accommodation letters do go to the professors at the beginning of the year. Your child just hands it to them, and they're pretty good about being stealthy. The cool thing is about college, they have, as part of the services to students with disabilities. Thanks, Angela. I saw that. Okay. They have testing rooms and proctors, so they can, like if your child needed extra time for written work or needed to access some of that specialized equipment to be able to speak answers, things like that, they have in college special rooms that, as part of the disabled student services, that students can go to. So when an exam is scheduled, your child wouldn't go to the exam with the class. Your child would go to the exam at their DSPS appointment time, and that's helpful. And it can be, you can schedule it at the same time, or just depending on what your schedule looks like. But yeah, those college supports aren't technically IEP supports after that. There's no annual goals or things like that, but sorry, did you want to tell me something? Okay, sorry. The college supports do come in there. Okay, so let me see. Access to playground equipment was Angela's question. Oh, that makes me sad, Angela. So your child isn't able to access some of the equipment, or oh, that's a bummer. Hey, how about this? Since I don't have the full picture of what you're asking, will you please email me through Facebook, and then we'll talk more about it, because I want to make sure that I have a full understanding before I address it. But I do know that it can be frustrating, and we have the same issue right now at our schools too, where the ADA law isn't as comprehensive as sometimes I wish it would be. So for example, we may have great equipment that students in wheelchairs can't access. Well, where's their recreation opportunity? So if that's what you're talking about, then yeah, we can talk about it more. So Elizabeth's asking, are most teachers open to learning about and willing to talk about CMT? Do they get it? What do I think? What should parents educate the staff nurse, or is that too much? Oh God, no, it's not too much. Girl, you made a really cool video, Elizabeth. I remember that. So Elizabeth, it showed, she made a video with her son's class, kind of explaining what CMT was. I know that when teachers are crazy busy and they're just trying to make the year kind of collect itself, I think it probably, right now with the pressure that we have on teachers, I don't know that going in and doing a whole lesson would be open for everybody. But Definitely inform. Remember that inform, advocate, repeat. You're going to have to do that a whole bunch. So use the resource that we have through CMTA to start with, and then just kind of check in with the teacher and see what questions they have. As your child, if your child beats me on their timeline of acceptance and is okay with it and is able to talk about it, then you can kind of adjust as your child gets older in terms of what terminology they're able to access and understand. Because initially you can just talk about it like the covering on a pipe or something, to talk about like the sheath that goes around the nerve, and then eventually add in like the technical terms would be great. But oh, how funny. Sorry, gosh, it's funny that I keep trying to read these so I can catch up with them, and then I'm like interrupting my own thoughts. So yes, for sure. Talk to the parent or talk to the teachers about it, talk to the staff about it. Depending on the severity, the school nurse is going to have involvement that is different. Like, I didn't need a whole bunch of school nurse time when I was in school because the severity wasn't there. But sometimes if our children are in wheelchairs right now, then yeah, like the school nurse is going to need to be around to help provide, if nothing else, respite. Can you tell we live in a military place? Sorry about the noise. So Amanda's referencing the CMTA page has a ton of information. Yep, we wrote that. I'm glad that you know about that. It was very helpful and you had it printed out. Oh my gosh, Amanda, this makes me so happy. Sometimes I do things like this and then I never find out, like who they helped or how they helped. So that is so exciting. That is awesome. Yeah, great. So that's really cool to see. And you're welcome, Allison. So what other questions do you have? I'm trying to get this to scroll down and it's not working. So. All right, darlings. Well, please use CMTA. I am on the advisory board, so if you need to reach out like with more personal questions that you didn't want me to address all like this, then trust me, I understand. You can definitely reach out through that and email. And again, we put in the comments, but if you just wanted to go to the cmtausa.org page and then type in schools, really quickly it'll show up right there. It's the 504 versus IEP information and the info page that you can give to teachers. And then there's a secondary info page that you can give to nurses. It's a little bit more heavy on the medical terminology, whereas the teachers is kind of focused on the everyday classroom implications. All right. Well, with that, I know this is going to be posted up on CMTA, their website for later use. I probably will never watch it because it is horrible to watch yourself on video. But I really do appreciate you spending some time with me tonight and giving me the opportunity to help you and your children and all that good stuff. So I wish you the best, and thanks for being part of the CMT family. Bye.